Today, we are honored to host two experts on the topic of transitioning to college. On behalf of GoToCollege Fairs and everyone at the 2022 Learning Differences Virtual College Fair, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our panelists, Debbie Reuter, Director of the Center of Students with Disabilities at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, and Alexander Morris Wood, Dean of Admissions, Transition Programs, and Strategic Outreach at Beacon College in Florida. Thank you both for taking the time to present on this important topic. Alex, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Avery, and welcome everyone. Really excited to be here. Today, we are going to be kind of talking about two different worlds of the preparation for college for students who learn differently or have other disabilities. Partly, we are going to talk about the pre-college part and then go into the accessibility services part. So again, we are talking solely today on the preparation. I'm going to turn it over really quickly to Debbie, who's going to talk a little bit about her institution before I get back and talk about Beacon College. Debbie.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming and attending. Welcome. I'm the director for the Center for Students with Disabilities at the University of Wisconsin in Whitewater. We are a four-year public university, comprehensive in Wisconsin. We have about 12,000 students who attend our campus. We also have a two-year campus that's associated with ours where students can get associate's degrees, but we provide bachelor's, master's, doctorates, and certificates. We have been a flagship in Wisconsin recognized for our priority mission to serve students with disabilities for over 50 years. So that really came out of national recognition for our wheelchair basketball team that's been in place for a long time. So we have about 10% of our students who identify as a student with a disability here. I will go ahead and turn it back over to Alex.
Awesome. So I represent Beacon College, which is a four-year private college about 45 minutes north of Orlando, and we exclusively work with students who learn differently. So very different than any other college in the United States. We primarily work with students with ADHD, dyslexia, different learning disabilities, autism spectrum disorders. We provide both associate's and bachelor degree programs. We have been ranked the #1 college for students who learn differently, a top 10 college in Florida. We're known for a couple things, one being our unique anthrozoology program, the study of the interaction of humans and animals, our study abroad programs, and our college readiness programs that actively works with students and parents up to 3 years before your transition to college, no matter the college. And you're going to see a little differently about Beacon. I hope you come to our booth, that everything we do is about a student who learns differently. And that is a different kind of modality than most colleges in the United States. So let's jump into it. So our goal, we have 3 goals today in a half hour, which is not always the easiest because this is a big topic, but I think we could do it. I'm going to talk really more about pre-college considerations and how do you evaluate a college if you have a learning disability and attention issue or other impairments. And then Debbie's going to come back and really talk practically through what should you do when you go to college? How do you navigate accessibility services? And what are some considerations that you want to have? I think it's always important to talk through the change in culture around students with disabilities going to college. I think when I started my career, and I'm sure Debbie could agree, there's a whole different world around, no, you're good, you can go back to the other slide here. There's a whole different kind of philosophy around people with disabilities attending college. And I think what's so important is, yes, students with disabilities can go to college. They can go to 4-year college, they could be successful, they can graduate on time, they could meet the demands like every other college student. But what we have found as the biggest barrier is the lack of preparation to get you there, that transition from high school or another college to a 4- or 2-year college. And that really is what sets everyone back. The cognitive skills, thinking skills could all be there, but if you're not prepared for that launch, people with physical disabilities that might be deaf or hard of hearing, learning and attention issues, so on and so forth. That's where we start to see students at a disadvantage. So part of what we're going to try to do today is provide some education around what you should consider as you're making that transition. So let's talk about the important piece, which I'm sure many of you are in high school or you work in a high school. You know, you're going to hear a lot of times that you need to know the difference between IDEA and ADA, all these legal terms and acronyms. And I think what's really important is that we make this as easy to digest as possible. And what's important to recognize is that students going to college have been part of the same educational model for like 15 years. And then all of a sudden, you'll hear it in a little bit, we're going to ask you to flip that upside down and do something completely different. And that comes really fast. It could be really scary and could be confusing, especially if you're not prepared for that educational change. So what I thought we would start with is just quickly talk through what are the 4 major components of high school for students who learn differently or have various disabilities to kind of get your mind going about the changes that you'll hear. I think first and most importantly is that when you are in high school, it is our job as professionals, as educators, to either remove unnecessary barriers to your learning through providing like an accommodation, things like extended time. You might get separate testing. You might get a instructional accommodation of a lot of repetition. You might have your learning environment modified. You might not have to take state exams. You might not have to take certain courses. For a lot of students, your course has been modified because you don't have to do homework or tests. You might have these exemptions. That's really important to understand. And what ends up happening is that an individual education program is basically created for you based on your need, which kind of goes into the second part. High school is really student-centric. It is awesome. You have professionals dedicated to work with you. You have plans based on your learning profile and needs, and there's constant evaluation and data collection about your performance. And parents, you are heavily involved because you are responsible for student performance. You have to be involved in your annual reviews, your PPT meetings, all of those evaluations. The teacher's job is to collect necessary data to inform you about student performance. And unfortunately, what happens is that we're so focused for students with learning differences on just getting sometimes you through high school that we forget that there is a huge planning period that needs to happen starting really 9th, 10th grade. And while most students have transition plans, if you are college bound, what we have seen is that not a lot of guidance counselors and college counselors in the high school model are equipped or informed enough to help students who learn differently make appropriate post-secondary choices. You're not usually taking classes on what is it like for students with learning disabilities to go to college. What is the difference between a support system for an attentional issue or an autism spectrum disorder? So what we see is a lot of students, as they're getting closer to that junior and senior year, are not being exposed to what I call a differentiated college transition plan. And that's why we are here, because we want to kind of inform you about some steps that you want to take. At Beacon College, we implemented our own theory around the adjustment to college life. Our goal, and I think everybody's goal, is to make college a little less scary. And how do you do that? You got to do a lot of pre-work to make college a little more manageable. And we have a 4-stage process. So if anything you get out of this, in my part, please listen carefully about some things that you could do now to get you ready for what's to come. First, you need to be really aware. You have to increase your self-awareness around your current educational programming and what's going to happen in college. That's for student and parent. Students, you need to stop relying on technology and professionals and increase your own skill strengths when in terms of your executive functioning skills. Can you track your own assignments? Can you monitor your deadlines? Are you tracking your grades? Do you have a daily living routine that's yours and not based off of your schools like Google Classroom or Canvas? Are you ready to manage setbacks? Do you have the coping strategies necessary to regulate your emotions, to think flexibly or differently around problem solving? Do you know how to take one problem and think of 4 different solutions? Then you'd be able to self-advocate and reach out for help. We found that if you go through these 4 stages, that adjustment to college is going to be a little easier. And what I want to do briefly is talk about two areas. So the next slide talks about how you could start getting ready now in terms of that authentic awareness. So part of what you're going to hear is that if you have visited one college, if you've explored one college's support programs, you've only explored one college. No two colleges are the same. And you are a unique person. So you are not the same as another student. So it's important now to do your homework. So I can give you 4 things to consider. First, if every student now can start identifying and labeling their accommodations and their modifications and talking with professionals about what will and will not carry over to college, you'd be surprised how much more successful you can be. What you'll hear in a little bit is that under 15% of students who learn differently actually receive accommodations in college. And what I found in all of our transition programs, we've worked with about 1,000 students in their preparation to college, is that less than 20% of our students actually know their accommodations. So how do you know how to ask for help if you don't know what you got? Second, get ahead, get organized. Research every school's documentation requirements. At Whitewater, you might have to submit a 504 IEP psychoed. At another college, they might require different testing. So you have to make sure that you are following every school's protocols. Then I want you to really think about what are these at cost or additive programs really providing you? Over the past 10 years, more and more colleges in the United States has provided additive programs geared towards students who learn differently, typically costing more on top of tuition. But think about, what are they actually providing you? How long are they providing you a service? A lot of colleges focus on that first year retention, and then you don't get services your second year. So you got to plan for the long term. And with that, really start looking at your current support plan, who is in your circle of support, and how are you going to transition from what you have to what you need in college, especially if you have co-occurring issues like anxiety, depression, or other mental health considerations. When you go to these colleges, I want you to start evaluating them in 4 areas. First, when you start looking at a college, especially for students who learn differently, yes, you can look at variables like sizes of classes, things like that. I want you to take it a step further. First, when you start to look at the people that are providing you the service in the writing center or the math center or the disability resource center, who are these people? What are their area of expertise? If you're currently getting specific support in reading through like Orton Gillingham, and then you're going to get support from a peer in college, that's a big difference. You got to think about that. You want to think about how many staff are available based on the student body. I work at a college that's only for students who learn differently. I went and did a training at a college, 1 disability resource officer for 10,000 students. Can you get your needs met like that? How does the college provide you social and emotional support, holistic support for students? And how are the college specifically getting students ready before you enter? And while you're there, as a member and the leader of my college's admissions team, don't be afraid to ask really tough and pointed questions. This is a big investment. So ask, how does a disabilities office collaborate with faculty or mental health services or career services? What are your responsibilities when you get your accommodations? When you ask for support, is that something you have to consistently ask for? Or is this something that can be built in? And what professional support you can get? Once you do that, you'll be able to self-advocate. So let's talk about that piece really quickly. One of my least favorite things that I see is when we just say a student needs to self-advocate and that's all they'll need to do in college. It ain't that easy. So if you're 18 and you're worried about self-advocating in college, that's okay. It's not that easy to do. It takes steps. You got to know yourself. You got to recognize a problem is happening. You have to identify what you actually need supported. How are you asking for help? You got to develop a sequence plan. Know what resources are available. Communicate appropriately. Manage that stress of asking for help and then coming up with solution 2, 3, or 4 if the plan doesn't work. But if you're able to self-advocate, we're going to bridge now into college. Working with people like Debbie and her staff is going to be a lot easier. So now let's talk about what happens when you go to college. Debbie.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alex, for reviewing all of that. I think it's great information for everyone to keep in mind while you're still in high school. And that is something that we also really try to emphasize, is getting yourself prepared to make this transition. So empowering yourself with the knowledge that you need of what it's going to really be like when you transition to college. What are some of those differences going to be? Knowing what your needs are. What are the accommodations that you're really using now? What are the accommodations that might be listed on your IEP that you're not necessarily utilizing or that aren't actually all that helpful? Knowing what those things are. And as Alex said, knowing actually what your disability or your learning difference is. Recognizing what your strengths are. So I find a lot of students coming in who've used accommodations throughout high school are really prepared to come to college because they've been utilizing a whole toolbox of things to get them there. They have a team in place and know how to ask for help. But if those are challenges for you, start learning to do that and depending on yourself for learning how to ask for what you need and not letting everybody else do that for you. So some of the differences I think we've already heard a little bit about. What are the differences in the laws and how to get services. In high school, when you transition from middle school to high school or grade school all the way through, you're usually working with an individual education plan or a 504 plan. Those usually you have team meetings with parents, your case manager, your counselor, everybody's on board together. So that's something that's going to be a little bit different in college. You're not going to have a whole team at a meeting looking over your progress. Sometimes your coursework is modified slightly. Maybe you don't have the same expectations in high school of completing the same length of paper as everybody else, or getting as many assignments in. But that's going to be really different once you get to college. In college, all faculty have expected outcomes for their courses. Those would be a fundamental alteration of the course for a faculty to change that for somebody. So we're trying to even the playing field in college and give you access that you are legally allowed, but we're not going to be able to tell a faculty member to change what the expected outcome of the course is. That's pretty much set in stone. So getting used to what are the expectations of some college level work. So maybe you can even take some courses like bridge programs or community college classes to get an idea of what the expectations might be like. Parents have access to grades now. I know those kinds of things the programs were just happening when my kids were in high school. And we hear that a lot, that students have their parents wanting to know exactly where the grades are, what assignments are turned in, if there's something missing. In college, faculty are not required in the same way that high school instructors are to submit everything into their software program. So even if you were to allow a parent to have access to something, faculty may not have all of the information that you're used to seeing in their software management programs. So it really requires the student to know where they're at, use their executive functioning skills, and communicate with their faculty. Ask what do I need to do to get caught up, go to office hours. I mean, one thing, faculty do all have office hours and are there to help and support you. So they are a new member of your team here, just like your instructors in high school are a member of your team. Also, the staff in a disability service office is here to help support you and help you advocate as well. But there are different laws. You're an adult once you're in college. So the FERPA laws will restrict the kind of information that's going to your parents unless you allow them to see it. But it's still really a good opportunity to start taking over that information together. My practice in our office is really not to discuss a student's situation without the student present. That's just not something that I would endorse, because it's really you involved in the process. And the legal protections, again, are things like, really, they're really pretty new laws. I mean, Section 504 from the 1973 Rehabilitation Act has been around a long time, but I mean, only since 1990 has the ADA been signed into law. That's our major civil rights law that we abide by. in 2000, I think it was around 2012, that they added some amendments to broaden the protections under ADA to include individuals with more mental health conditions and things that might also be impacting their ability to function and learn. So the rights have been expanded, but we're still sort of in a newer phase of learning how to work through all of these civil rights. So I guess my point here is it's really the guidance that we all get in higher ed is that it is an interactive process. So that means you as the student, you need to be involved in the process, working with the Disability Service Office, identifying what your needs are, and learning how to request those. And we're here to listen and help you facilitate those needs. One of the ways we do that is through looking over documentation. Again, some of the new guidance, and we operate under AHEAD, which is our professional organization in higher education for working with students with disabilities. And that guidance is that one big piece of documentation is your firsthand report. So you telling us what are your needs. That's really our primary documentation, is through that interactive process in an interview. But it's helpful for us to have documentation to see what the disability is. It's also sometimes the more extensive the accommodations, the more information we need so that we know we're really providing the appropriate accommodation. So medical documentation from a licensed professional, specialist, a neuropsych exam is all very helpful to us. But I wouldn't, in our university, we would not require somebody to get a brand new neuropsych evaluation in their junior and senior year if they've just recently had one in the last couple of years. But if it's a new condition or a new diagnosis, then it's probably going to have some more information that's going to help us know what you need, help us provide the accommodations that you need. So most offices also have forms that could just be signed with information about the fundamental limitations that you might experience in college, and could also help inform that decision making. So if you don't have the most current neuropsych, you can also bring a form probably from an institution to your psychologist, psychiatrist, or medical doctor. And then IEPs and 504 plan summary of performance usually have pretty good information on there. And so if we're, if you've been diagnosed with a learning disability and ADHD and have received accommodations for those throughout all of school, that's probably going to have enough information for you to get the accommodations that you need. Some schools may have different requirements. And again, some accommodations may require more thorough documentation, particularly when it comes to specific programs that have independent licensing requirements. So nursing exams or exams to become a licensed educator in a state, those kinds of exams are probably going to require more in-depth documentation. So sometimes we ask for more information if we know that that's what you're eventually going to need, just so that you're prepared when that time comes as well. So again, I don't want to put too much emphasis on the documentation because we're really looking at a holistic view and taking your firsthand account as part of that piece. So again, this is just kind of more information related to that. So the more information we have, the more we know of how to facilitate the accommodations that are going to help you within that coursework and to be successful. So the part of the process of getting accommodations, again, it's not just like your IEP doesn't just follow you in with your academic record. That's not something that anybody receives. Usually you may, some colleges may ask, do you want information about a disability service on your application? But other than that, the rest of those records are not coming with you. It's just your academic records. So you need to apply for services. And again, now that you are considered an adult, it is your responsibility to apply for services with an access office or disability service office. There's a lot of different language around that and different different philosophies related to why offices call themselves different things. And for us, because we do have kind of a historical perspective of students with physical disabilities, we do like to keep that language within our office. That's an identity that people are proud of on our campus. Some offices are called access offices, and anything related to getting accommodations, you can ask your admissions office if you're not sure where to find them. So you would apply for services, submit whatever documentation you have, and then again, like I was talking about, that interactive process, you want to make an appointment with a coordinator to discuss the accommodations you use, the kinds of reasons why you want to use them, the kinds of classes that you're going to take, and what you're going to need for each. And then you would create a plan that would be similar to like an IEP, but it would not reveal to your instructors what your disability is. So again, unlike in high school where all the staff and everybody's kind of in the know, when it comes to your services in higher ed, it's really your information. It's protected information. Nobody's going to know exactly what your disability is. And nobody should be asking you that information. It's your private information that you don't need to reveal. All they really need to know is whether you get to test with extended time or, have additional note-taking services or whatever that might be. So again, some of the common accommodations that students use are, really the most common is extended time on exams. 1.5 times is really the typical time allowed for extended time on exams. I come from a perspective of universal design for learning and have presented frequently on that as well. And I think that it's something that in high schools, it's more understood, but I think more and more faculty are understanding that providing multiple means of representation and assessment and information is a better way to teach. It's a good pedagogical philosophy. So some faculty now are not so concerned with a timed test. Some faculty are allowing people the time they need to take their exams. And when that is the case, that's great. But if an instructor has a requirement for a time limit on a test, we can usually just extend it 1.5 times unless there's some other specific reasons for a longer extension. Note-taking assistance now with a lot of technology available. We have been using electronic note-taking systems that help record the lecture. Some of them even give you transcripts, so those can be helpful, but also taking advantage of learning how to take your own notes, because you should still a good process for you to do that. Some bridge programs or special supplemental programs in school can help you prepare for taking college notes, but there's certainly some technology available. And a lot of universities, a lot of people are coming into schools requesting peer notes, which is just very difficult sometimes to get. That is one accommodation that can be very difficult to provide. And probably at Beacon College, where everybody's, in the sign of the same boat, it's really a good idea to try to start getting used to some of those technologies, like the audio note takers, taking your own notes, and using all of those resources to help you. Of course, common accommodations for anybody with who's deaf or hard of hearing would be an ASL interpreter or captioning. And we also provide text-to-speech software, audiobooks. So things like that are really the most common accommodations. So I think we're right at half an hour, and happy to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, I think.
Yes, amazing timing. And thank you so much, Alex and Debbie. I know we are all giving you a very big virtual round of applause. So as we begin to take some questions, please make sure that everyone has the question and answer box open on the webinar window according to the instructions I provided at the beginning. As a reminder, mouse over the bottom of the Zoom webinar window to find the Q&A icon. Click on that icon to open the window and ask your questions. So to begin, do media outlets like US News rank colleges based on how well they help neurodiverse students?
I think I can answer that in the admissions world. No, and that's an unfortunate reality. There are, list, best value schools that do, but I think there's two components that are important about the reason why that does not happen. One, unfortunately, people with disabilities is not a main focus of college retention officers. So it is, while it could be 10 to 12% of a student body, it's not always the #1 minority group that is looked at when looking at services. And it's a huge problem. It is beyond just colleges. I think including neurodiversity in inclusion statements are really important. So there's that. And then two, I think it's key to remember that not all programs service the same student population. So you'll see today in the college fair, for example, there might be a college that really focuses on students with attention issues, ADHD. Then you'll have one that's solely autism. So what you want to really do is, when you're looking at these programs, Best Value Schools is, again, a great resource to look at. Be really specific about the type of population that you're looking for. But no, US News does not report on a ranking system for colleges that are supportive for students with learning and attention issues.
Yeah, I would just like to add too that, going back to something Alex brought up earlier, when you're talking to colleges and considering disability service offices, looking at the student ratio to professionals serving them, it's really probably one of the best indicators of how much support your student's going to get. If you're working with an office that has 1 or 2 staff serving, again, thousands of students, it's going to be really difficult for them to help your student navigate. If you are looking at somebody who has a ratio of maybe only caseloads of a couple hundred students, then that student's going to get more of the attention that they need. So it really can make a big difference. And again, being very specific. Some schools have very specific programs for neurodiversity. Others just have it incorporated within their office. So I think that's a really good point.
Okay, thank you both. Next question: do any/all university accommodations include substituting projects and papers in lieu of timed tests for students with test-taking anxiety?
Debbie, you want to go for that one?
I'm going to go ahead and go first, because I don't know what it would be like at Beacon College for all of you there. Again, it would be considered a fundamental alteration of the course outcomes at a college to give a student a different kinds of assessment. I'm not saying that it would never happen. I think there are probably some instances where there's a potential for that to happen. But again, it would be very specific to the disability, to the course, and it would take a very interactive process with the instructor to make sure that the course outcomes are still being met. I would say in general, I wouldn't expect that to happen, and that's not an accommodation that's typically provided.
Yeah.
So
at Beacon, we create our assessments around students who learn differently. So we do multivariate assessments, but I would agree, do not expect that from a college. And I think the dangerous piece there is, if one professor does it, does not mean everybody else is going to do it. So that's something to keep in mind. We don't always see consistency with faculty in how they deliver these modifications.
Thank you. In the process of college applications, when is a good time to submit applications for services?
Well, there's two parts. I think one piece that I want to hit on, and I think Debbie could then talk about when you submit for documentation. But for a lot of colleges, if you are looking at a program, like an at-cost program, typically it's 2 different applications. You are applying to the college. So university, I don't want to call out colleges. You're applying to a college, and then once you get accepted, you tend to apply for that at-cost or additive program. So be cognizant that you might get into a college, but there might be space limitation for program services. I've seen colleges that only work with 10 students. So I would say you want to get in your college application before your winter break of senior year, because the next semester you got to probably focus in on the harder parts, getting accepted to these programs and getting all your stuff together for disability services.
yeah, I would agree. I mean, we start doing intake appointments in the spring after students have applied to the university and been accepted. We also do have a program where we work with students on some kind of a conditional admission process where they could they could potentially just be in our bridge program over the summer. So sometimes we do work with students who are not fully admitted. And so I think reaching out to have an information meeting anytime the year before is probably a good idea. And then the actual application for services would happen after you've been admitted to the university or are planning to participate in a specific program within the university. But yeah, that's another good point about some universities do have special programs for neurodiverse students that are limited, or other kinds of supplemental programs that are limited. So I think most colleges who have the resources available are going to be really glad to talk to you in an informational setting well before you need to apply, but the actual application happens after.
All right, thank you both. Next question, students with EF challenges. What are some best practices for helping families and students find colleges and transition to college?
So executive functioning challenges, I think so that's what EF is. I think part of it is that you have to think of the college search and application and transition period like you're breaking down a large assignment. And there's not a lot of tools out there for people who learn differently. So you want to think of manageable chunks of time over an extended period of time. And that really helps with task management, planning, prioritizing. I think getting support is your best friend. It is okay to recognize that not everybody could do this alone. There's ed consultants, there are college admission counselors, there's your counselor. Beacon College, we do that work with students as early as junior year. So I think part of it is, my advice, do not feel like as a parent, as a family, you have to do it all by yourself. It is okay to create your team around that. But creating chunks, I saw is very helpful over 2 years.
All right, next question. Alex was mentioning the excellent questions you have to ask when interacting with the Access ED office or Access Ed office. Would you be able to repeat the first three?
Sure. The first is, how does disability services collaborate with members of the college? So how would an office that Debbie runs work with different offices at the college? That's academic, res life, mental health, career. The second is, what are the students' responsibilities in obtaining their accommodation? So if you have note taking, for example, what does the student have to do actively to keep getting that accommodation? And then I think a big one are services self-scheduled or consistent. So if you're meeting with the writing center, is that something you have to schedule every single time you want to use that service? Or is that something that you could schedule for a semester?
Thank you. Next question, what websites can you use to find colleges that serve neurodiverse kids?
Again, best value schools, I could pitch a great ed consultant. His name is Dr. Eric Enlick. He has a fantastic list on his website for students who are neurodiverse. But there are specialty ed consultants that I would really recommend you going to that really know the ins and outs of all of our colleges, because Beacon is different than our competitors and our competitors are different from their competitors.
Amazing, thank you. Are there any resources beyond the K&W guide to colleges for students with learning disabilities that you could recommend? Are there any resources for other countries?
I mean, I think that, again, looking at consultants, looking at learning disability associations and what they have listed on their website, but really talking to the schools, that there's so much more to consider. Is the student wanting to be close to home? I mean, all of the other kinds of questions that you would want to be asking for a transition like going away to college, you want to consider as well, because there may be some great schools that have programs that are on the East Coast, but if your student isn't going to do very well being a plane ride away from home, then that maybe isn't the best choice for you. So taking into consideration all of those things and then talking to the individual offices and asking the questions that Alex had suggested, how do you collaborate? I think hopefully most offices are collaborating with faculty, doing trainings across campus with mental health areas. we're an office that does touch all of those places, housing. So I think there's just a lot more to consider other than just national rankings in that whole decision-making process.
Thank you. And it looks like a couple of questions are coming in to just repeat Dr. Eric's last name. Would you mind?
Sure. Erickson, Erikson.
Thank you. And again, we have about 5 minutes left. We'll try and get through as many questions as possible. Quite a few are coming in.
Sure.
I'm just going to take them as they come. Next question, do any colleges help with Orton Gillingham?
Not directly. You're not going to find a college, I think, that does for every student direct Orton Gillingham reading support. You could try to find colleges that have literacy support, but Orton Gillingham is very specialized. Typically, students that require that level of specificity should think about continued services when they're in college private tutoring.
Amazing. Next question. In my kids' neurodiverse testing, they suggest a case manager who works with the kid and helps with him with communicating to professors, etc. Is that something provided in colleges?
Again, I think it can be. Certainly, we are fortunate to have a full enough staff that we have smaller caseloads. And again, at a school like Beacon, where their focus and mission is serving students. So I think it depends on the questions you ask at each individual campus. We've had staff members who do ADHD coaching. We offer small group support for certain students. So again, kind of getting down to what is the case management at a school.
All right, next question. How/where can you find information for each college's support program for differential learning prior to applying for admissions?
That's a tough one. I think if you go to a college's website and you go to student support, or like under academics, it's usually academic support programs or academic support services. My rule of thumb is if those offices are hard to find on a website, they're not promoting them. So, but typically they're under academic support.
Thank you. How do students with learning differences usually fare on the social side of college life? And does the social element ever interfere with academics in more pronounced ways than typical students?
I mean, I could say from Beacon really quickly is like, it feels like when they come to our college, they're free to be really social because we have such an inclusive community. So we have to work on different types of executive functioning skills. How do you prioritize and plan academics over your social life? But it's, especially after COVID, it's been a big change. And I think students are hungry to engage with each other. So I'm seeing more socialization, not less socialization. I don't know, Debbie, if you're seeing something similar.
Yeah, actually, I think that's really true. And of course, part of going away to college for any student is maneuvering those social relationships. So if it's a student that has a little bit more difficulty with the nuances of a social relationship, there's going to be some things that come up. But those are reasons why I think having a lot of support for a student and somebody to talk to, kind of their go-to person, getting a team together that can really help support them is a good idea. But yeah, we're definitely seeing more socializing, yes.
All right, next question is two-part question. Would you recommend writing about your SLI differences in your applications essay? And for students with SLI, standardized tests can be challenging. Do colleges take that into account?
Debbie, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I mean, for us, we always do recommend that students, if they're comfortable, go ahead and reveal their needs, because we are a campus that's very inclusive. We're very well known for having a large student population that uses our services. So it's definitely not a disadvantage, and it usually helps get you connected to the right people right off the bat. So I think of it as an advantage. And also because we have some extra supports for students who are sort of, a little bit below the typical admission rates. So we would reach out to them beforehand if we knew that information. So we recommend it. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's a detriment.
Well, we require it, so there's
Yeah.
that. But in terms of, there's just but in a college admission essay, I would say my recommendation is if you are going to talk about your learning profile or your learning needs, make sure it still connects to the question they're being asked. I read a lot of admission essays where they self-disclose, but it's not related to the admission essay question. And then in terms of testing, a lot of schools are still going test optional. I still recommend you looking at does your high school education match the college's rigor? Just because a school is test optional doesn't mean the rigor has changed, because it hasn't. Admission standards are changing, college rigor is staying the same.
So we don't have much time, but I want to get just a couple of these questions answered. One last one, or not last one, but would you just confirm Dr. Erickson's first name?
Eric.
I will type that in the response here.
Oh, you know what? It's Eric Endelson. Let me actually I will put in the chat for everybody his name. Eric Erickson is a theorist. I was doing research earlier. I will get his name and type it in the chat. My apologies.
And make sure when you type it in the chat, it's to everyone and not just the moderators or panelists. So is it better to pick a college that has a paid program?
A paid program, I think, again, it always depends on what your needs are. I've seen these programs be fantastic, and some students still struggle. So again, you got to know yourself.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, there are certainly plenty of programs that charge a lot for services, but knowing what it is that you're really trying to get out of that service and what you're willing to put into it is important. And the cost, there's a big variation between the cost of additional services.
Yes, and I got Eric's name, it's Eric Endlick.
And so unfortunately that comes to the conclusion of our presentation today.